Hello, today I will be showing you how to install Archlinux on a Hyper-V virtual machine with a GUI and networking. So when you launch the virtual machine, you'll see that I have the ISO loaded up, and then there's two options. You can do x86 64, which is 32 and 64-bit architecture, or there's the older i6-86. So I'm just going to go ahead and select x86 64. And you'll see all this stuff loads up for the live media of Archlinux, and you're put into this root at Arch ISO, which is what it is. It's an Arch ISO. So the first thing you want to do is check that you have internet, because you need internet to install the base packages of Archlinux. So I'm going to ping Google, and as you can see, I have internet. Archlinux by default comes with wired networking, and Hyper-V tricks it into thinking it's a wired connection. So now that I have internet, the first thing I want to do is update the system clock, because it's still set to when this ISO was created. So that just takes it and updates it. The next thing we're going to want to do is create a partition for the hard drive. I currently have a 15 gigabyte hard drive set up for this. So there's this program called fdisk. And you can type fdisk-L and it'll show your partitions. And I have my 15 gigabyte hard drive right in there. So I'm going to type fdisk/dev/sda, because that's the name of the disk. Then it will take me into fdisk. I can press M for help. And it gives me a list of all the commands. Now we're going to want to select N for add a new partition. And then it's going to say, is this the primary partition or an extended partition? This is the primary partition, which is the default, so I'm going to hit enter. It is the first partition, which is also the default, so I'm going to hit enter. And then it asks me what's the first sector of this partition, which is basically determining the size of the partition. And I just want all the defaults because I want the entire hard drive to be the single partition. So then I'm going to toggle it as a bootable flag, which is part of master boot record. Not necessarily needed, but I find it works better with it. So it's bootable flag, and then I'm just going to hit W, and I'm just going to write it out to the disk. Now the next thing I'm going to do is format this partition, which is going to be a command called mkfs dot whatever file type you want, which I'm going to use ext4 because that's generally a good one. And I'm going to select the partition, which is SDA1. And the reason I'm using a 15 gigabyte hard drive is because ext4 is a journaled file format or file system. So if I used like the default 127 gigabyte hard drive, I'd have to create the journal for the entire 127 gigabytes, which would kind of defeat the purpose of the extendable Dynamics hard drive, because it would just have to create 127 gigabytes worth of space right there. Now that I've formatted it, I need to mount it. So I'm type mount and then the partition and then /mnt. And that works. So I have it mounted now. And now what I'm going to do is install the base packages for Archlinux, which is done by typing pack/strap/mnt. So we're installing it to the mounted partition. Type base. And this will go through and install all the base partitions, or all the base packages for Archlinux. Okay, now that we have all the base packages for Archlinux installed, we're going to create what's called an FS tab. So an FS tab is a file that contains a table that shows all of the partitions and connected hard drive devices on the system. So to do that, there is a command called gen fstab-u and then /mnt, then two less or greater than signs, and then we're going to choose where to put the fstab file, which is /mnt etc fstab. So we're going to run that. Whoop, I have a typo. There we go. And it creates the fstab file. Now that we have the system basically created, we're going to change the root directory of this arch ISO, and we're going to change into the system. So let's go arch-ch-root/mnt. So this changes the root directory to the mounted partition. So it says, and now it says root at arch ISO. So now we're in the system, the actual system, and not necessarily completely on the live media, even though we still technically are on the live media. So now we're going to want to set the time zone of the system. So this is done by ln-s, lowercase s, /user/share/zone-info/ and then you can pick a region. I'm selecting America, and then / and then you can select a city. And so I'm typing New York because that's the closest one to me. And then we type /etc/local time, which writes it to this. So it created the region info. Now we're going to set the hardware clock, which is what runs when the system is turned off. Systoh. So you type HW clock, and sys, and basically sets the hardware clock to system clock. And then that completes. Next we got to set the locale stuff like language and keyboard layout, which is done by editing this file called, which is called the locale etc/locale.gen. And there's this big file, and you can select all the formats. I'm looking for ENUS UTF-8, which I skipped. It's up ENUS UTF-8. Then, so with Nano, you Control O to write it out, Control X to exit. I uncommented that line. Now I can do this this command called locale-gen, which will read that, and it says ENUS UTF-8 done. So I created it. So now that we're done with that, I'm going to set the host name of the system, and in this step you could edit it. You can create a file called /etc/hostname, and I can just name it, sysadmin project final. And then this is a new file, I just write it out. And then you can also edit what's called etc/hosts, which in here you can add it to a domain and stuff. So the next thing we need to do is we need to set a password for the root directory. So passwd is the command for that. I'm just going to make the password root. And so that's basically the setup of it, of all of the Arch Linux stuff. Now we need to install a bootloader. I'm going to be using grub because it's generally the most popular. So I can do pacman-S to install a package. And I'm just going to set grub-bios. And then it's like, yes, I want to proceed with the installation. And then it finishes. And so now that I have the BIOS, I'm going to want to install grub, which is done by doing a command called grub-install. Then type --target equals i386. Whoa. i386 -PC, then /dev/sda, because we're on that disk is where we're installing grub. So it says installing for i386 platform, and it says installation finished, no errors reported. Then we need a grub config file. So we do this grub-mkconfig. This tells it, what to boot and stuff. /boot/grub. So we do grub-mkconfig-lowercase-o/boot/grub.cfg. Let me run that. It says generating grub configuration. It found a Linux kernel ISO, or not ISO. It found a Linux image. So that's what it was looking for. And at this point, we can exit the change root, and then we can reboot. And when this comes up, we're going to get the Archlinux ISO again. And instead of this time, we're going to go boot existing OS. And it says welcome to Grub. And then there's advanced options for Archlinux, but we're just going to load default Archlinux. And then like that, sysadmin final project login. We're going to log into the root directory. And then we're in. Okay, now that we have Archlinux installed and we're actually on the disk, I'm going to show steps on how to add a user to just the system. So there's a command called user add, and you type -m, which sets its home directory, which is just default. So then -g, which sets the group, and by default on Archlinux, the group is just called users. Then -s, which sets the language shell, and in this case /bin/bash. And then we're going to name the user. I'm just going to name this user1. And it looks like it added. And then we should be able to add a password, which is done with the passwd and then the username. And we can set that to Panther $. Panther $. Okay. Now that we have the password set, I'm going to show how to get the GUI going. Okay, so now that we've added the user, and I've hit enter a bazillion times, I'm going to show you how to get the networking working, because currently, when you ping, it doesn't work. Currently, when you ping, it doesn't work. So, you need to start the DHCP daemon to make it work, which is done with systemctl start DHCP CD. And now I think pinging Google will come back with some return. There it is. So that started it. What we could do is also systemctl enable DHCP CD, which will then start it on boot. So now that we have the internet back, we can work on installing a GUI. So to install a GUI, the first thing we're going to need is some packages by a thing called Xorg, which is a Linux display manager. So we do pacman-s xorg-server space xorg-xinit, then space xorg-utils. So this is all part of the display manager, all these packages. So then space xorg-server-utils, and then we're just gonna select a mirror, which we're default. We're just gonna use the default mirror. Well, default mirror. There we go. And so now that it has finished installing all the Xorg packages, we need to install video drivers for the system. And thankfully, Hyper-V with Archlinux has video drivers. So there's in this Xorg program. So what you can do is pacman-S xf86. This is called fx-video-fbdev. And so these are the video drivers. And they finished very fast. Now that we have the video drivers installed, we're going to want to install some more Xorg packages that have to do with like a virtual terminal inside the GUI. So we need pacman-s xorg/twm xterm xorg-xclock. So then we're going to install all those. And then now we should be able to go start X, and it loads into a kind of GUI. I've got a mouse and stuff now, like a virtual terminal. So I'm just going to go and exit this. And then so I'm back at the terminal. And then after that, I'm going to install the actual the desktop, the GUI packages. So now that we have a sort of GUI, we're going to install what's called a display manager, which in this case we're using the GNOME display manager, which handles logins and stuff. So in this case we're going to go -s gdm, and that will install the GNOME Display Manager. So now that we have the desktop manager installed, we are going to install a desktop environment. So I'm going to be using one called Solus, and specifically it's called Budgie. So to get this, pacman-s, and then just Budgie desktop. And I'm going to install it. And now that it's finished, I'm going to start the GNOME Desktop Manager daemon. So I'm going to go system ctl start or enable GDM to start it when it boots. And then I'm going to change it to start GDM. And then we should load into the GUI. And there's my user 1 account, and the password should be Panther $. Then I'm going to click this, and I have this. I can do GNOME or Budgie Desktop. So I can sign in. So now that we're in the GUI, I'm going to install a very popular package. But first I'm going to have to switch to the root user, which you just do by typing SW or SU and then the username, which is root, and then type the password, which is also root. So from here I can go pacman-s, and I'm going to install Firefox. And then select that repository, and yes. So then Firefox is installed, and I can literally just go here, and then Firefox. And here we are. And we can go to google.com. So that's how you go from the ISO of Archlinux to having a GUI and networking. And you're in your own user account, so it's different from the root. And that's that.